Very, very important questions. I mean, it really goes to the broader issue. If we don't know what our threat is, it's pretty tough to be able to address it, and the recognition that knowing what we know now is wonderful, but how are we able to anticipate and project and basically stay one step ahead of those that are looking to be destructive? I just note that there's a report out this morning from the House Science Committee that describes Russia's extensive efforts to influence U.S. energy markets through divisive and inflammatory posts on social media platforms, not unlike what was going on at the time of the election. I obviously haven't read this. This just came out this morning. But again, it just speaks to what we are dealing with and the kind of the multi-headed issue that it is, how you pin down or can target what that next threat is anybody's guess here. I wanted to ask just a few follow-on questions from some of the things that had been raised by members this morning. And this is directed to you, Congressman Matheson. Last Congress, when we moved the FAST Act through, we gave the Energy Secretary these emergency authorities, and we strengthened the information sharing with FOIA exemptions for our critical infrastructure information. Have these FOIA exemptions been helpful? And then to Senator King's question, he mentioned the issue of liability and the information sharing and how it can be further improved if you've got some assurances sure. that the sensitive information is going to be properly protected and free of liability concerns. So on the liability side of things, is this an area where we need to legislate with that? Are you comfortable with what we put in place with the FAST Act and the provisions that we have now with regards to the information sharing?
First on the FAST Act, and we of course supported the FAST Act as it moved through Congress. Your question of how it's played out now in terms of the FOIA exemptions, since this act, since it's been implemented, is a bit in its infancy, it's a little bit of an open question still.
Yes, we don't really know yet.
I have no concerns. I'm just saying I can't tell you this is how it's worked in a really substantive way, because it's just too new to give that kind of answer. But we did support the FAST Act as it was moving through Congress, and we appreciate that it's in law. If we have any issues with it, I'm sure we'll be communicating that back. On the liability, yeah, look, I think that this is an issue where there's always going to be an interest in us looking for opportunities to make sure that information that we pass on to our government partners has some level of protection. And the FAST Act clearly addressed some liability concerns that we had, and we appreciate that. Am I going to tell you we've got everything off the table now? I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing conversation as we look at going into practice. Where we have information transfer and making sure we have appropriate liability protections, that's going to be an ongoing conversation we're just going to have.
So, Assistant Secretary Walker, on the government disclosure of data, we've got the Critical Energy Infrastructure Information CEII, and this dealing with basically the public's right to know certain information. And I think we all support levels of transparency, but when it comes to critical infrastructure information, it seems reasonable that we want to be somewhat circumspect here. So is this an issue where we need to again look at FERC and how it is able to release data in the forms in the format that it is right now? Is this a policy, given what's going on out there in terms of balancing the need to know with the need to be as secure as possible? Is this something that we need to revisit possibly?
At this time, I don't think it is. I recently had a meeting with our newly confirmed administrator for EIA with regard to much of the information that is promulgated out through that department on a pretty regular basis. And the reason I had met with her was because of the significant work we're doing with developing this North American interdependency model for the entire energy system. And you know, clearly one of the things that's been raised as we start talking across the balancing authorities and the regional coordinators is the protection of information. And so that legislation actually enabled DOE to even develop a policy. So we're actually in the process of working through finalization of our policy with regard to the CEII that you noted that was defined in the FAST Act. So again, you know, I think the FAST Act provided for a very significant insight into the needed collaboration between, you know, Congress and the executive branch and all of the partners that really have the purpose of protecting national security.
Back to you, Mr. Matheson, and this is as it relates to compliance with mandatory standards. You know, you have said in your testimony that the electric sector today is the only one with mandatory and enforceable standards when it comes to cybersecurity. We have noted that, and in fact, these violations come with some fines and some pretty
That's
hefty
correct.
fines. You know, million dollars per day per violation is pretty significant.
Yeah.
But we also have those who would suggest that our utilities are overly focused on compliance. And so you've got a situation that in an effort to meet the mandatory standards that have been set out and avoid these financial penalties, nobody wants to be paying $1 million a day per violation, that the electric sector is possibly losing ground because they're focusing on the wrong thing here. They're focusing on the checking the box on the compliance, and they miss the goal of cybersecurity protections. Do you think that that's a real concern?
You know, I would resist that, actually. Okay. I believe that this is an industry-driven process through NERC to develop these standards. FERC, of course, approves those standards. Resilience and reliability have always been a concern for the electric industry throughout its history. Cyber is the issue that has evolved over the last several years as part of that now. But no, I don't see any sense where the regulations or the requirements that the NERC process has produced have diverted our attention as an industry from focusing on what's most important. I'd like to think instead it's actually created the focus on what we ought to be looking at. So I would disagree with that premise that it's caused some inappropriate attention on compliance at the expense of legitimate cybersecurity efforts.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask you one more question,
Sure.
and you were asked a question from Senator Dane specific to Montana and Montana's co-ops, but obviously in my state, pretty small entities. Do you have confidence that our smaller co-ops, our smaller entities are capable of meeting the cyber challenges? You know, it doesn't make any difference if you're in Seattle or if you're in Antioch. You still want to be able to rely on your energy
Absolutely.
grid, whether it's a little bit smaller or not. Yeah. Do you have a level of confidence that our smaller entities are holding up okay?
Yeah, I do have that confidence, and I'm going to say what everyone else has said in this hearing, that this is an evolving threat, so we never, even if we're confident today, we still have to work for tomorrow. I would offer Alaska specific. You know, there are a lot of our electric co-ops are isolated. They're microgrids, and we have one co-op in Alaska that's right now working on implementing sort of a cybersecurity protocol specifically for a microgrid distribution utility.
We think we're going to pioneer on this, and everyone's going to want to come up and see what we're doing.
I'm all for that, yeah. But because as we said earlier, every co-op's different, and municipal utilities have the same. And so, yeah, I like to think that individually, people recognizing these are my circumstances. What should I do to take on cybersecurity risk and mitigate in an appropriate way? And I see even smaller co-ops doing just that.
Good, good. One last question, and this relates to the workforce. And, you know, I appreciate what Senator Cantwell had raised in her opening statements, and the work that you have done, Dr. Endicott-Popovsky, in focusing just on this. The training is absolutely key and critical. I think we recognize that. And I think we know that the training has to go all the way down the chain. Those who are making the decision at the top, all the way down to the grid operators at you know, at the very, very local level. And I wrote down your comment here, Doctor, that you said that, you know, there's no firewall for stupid here. I think we all want to make sure that at the end of the day, we have that that level of training and skill and expertise all the way down. Are you convinced that we're getting the training all the way down to that local grid operator?
I think it's mixed, but I think that is the trend. Every person that participates in some fashion is a potential node in the network that can cause a problem. I think Mr. Lee had mentioned something about a phishing attack, clicking on a link and causing problems. I mean, this is a very common issue, and firewalls don't prevent that. You've got people that need to know not to do that sort of thing. So you're absolutely right. There does have to be training down through every level. There are some organizations that are modeling some very effective training. You have to avoid the yada yada flavor of the month. That happens in many organizations. I take asbestos training, I take this, I take that. And so there's some ways to make training vivid. NIST has some guidelines that they've published that are very good at telling you how to be effective with your training. We use them in our classes. But somehow you have to get it visceral for people. We could conduct a training here for the committee, give you a sense of what it's like to be the bad guys. Once you start to think like bad guys, you start to see more things. I had Student Internationally one time write me a little note, and I teach things that are safe to teach, operations, business operations, but he wrote me a very telling note. Why do you people in the West keep emphasizing the technology when the bad guys, and I'm thinking, how do you know, when the bad guys are always looking for the person? Mm-hmm. So if you put yourself in the role of the adversary, a nation state, if you have a particularly plumb target, something luscious that you can't resist, what lengths would you go to violate that system? How important is that to you? It's a completely different mindset. We have to be right every time. They only have to be right once. So it's a daunting problem, and we have complex systems and lots of participants. I don't think we can expect to get it right every time. I think we have to recognize vulnerabilities and risks. But awareness is the beginning. Yeah. I'd be happy to provide some materials if you're interested.
I think it would be helpful for the committee.
It's a passion of mine.
I can tell, and that's appreciated. Senator Cantwell, did you have any follow-on? Thank you. I want to thank each of you. I think your testimony has been very, very important, a very important discussion, and we'll look forward to additional input for the record, as some have promised. We'll look forward to working with you, Mr. Walker, in this this capacity here with a very keen focus on cyber. And I will note the committee's appreciation for your attendance here, Mr. Lee. Not only have you given us good insight, but I'm told that your wife is expecting and has been expecting to deliver for quite some time, and that your appearance here today was made possible because there's hopefully she's going to have this labor
today.
Commence
so she's amazing.
Soon after you are excused from this table. So hopefully if she's watching now, she's got the go-ahead and she can deliver a beautiful baby safely into the world, and we congratulate you on that. You always got to end the committee on a happy note. So thank you all.
Madam Chairman, I have a question.
Doctor.
I did get a real-time update on Senator Cassidy's question about the potential change in the language requirements for K-12 in the state of Washington. They are still considering computer language as a substitute for foreign language. The original bill died, but there's still residual interest in that concept, and it's being studied throughout this year. And apparently, we're going to be meeting with the Office of Superintendents here sometime in the near future to discuss this issue. So can you pass that on to him? Or?
We will share it with him and others as well.
All right,
Appreciate
thank
that.
you.
Thank you all. The committee stands adjourned.